Hi, my name's Simon Davies, Office Head of Norman F. Brown's, Bedale's top letting agent with award-winning customer service. We've put together a video as we've had an increasing number of questions and queries coming in from landlords about the Renters Reform Bill that's due to come in at the end of this year. It will be a huge change in legislation and it will change the way the private rented sector works. So we do have a lot of landlords who we work with who are wanting more information. So as part of our membership of the Guild of Property Professionals, Paul Offley, who is their Head of Compliance, has put together this great video to hopefully give you greater knowledge depth of what changes are possibly coming. Let's not forget, it is still going through the Lords. And it hasn't been finalised as yet, but it is due to come in roughly towards the end of the year. I'll hand over to Paul, who is going to give you a bit more information, and if you've got any other questions for us, please get in touch afterwards on 01677 422 82.
Hello, and first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this landlord information event. My name is Paul Offley and I work for the Guild of Property Professionals, but I've been involved with the estate and letting agency industry for about 46 years. Now, the last 30 of those, I've probably specialised in compliance and helping estate and letting agents be compliant. I'm therefore very pleased to be with you today to be able to talk about the Renters' Rights Bill and how that will impact you as private rental landlords in England. I appreciate that there have been much in the press over this and you may have many questions. So we are working with all of our guild members to help inform landlords of what the legislation means. And then it's going to be a bit of a double act. So I'm the bad cop telling you what the legislation is going to be. And then I'll hand over to our guild member who's going to talk to you about how they can help you and how they can make the implementation of this new legislation as smooth as it possibly can be. Now, I've got a couple of caveats. First of all, the information I'm going to talk about is correct at the time of recording on the 19th of March. Obviously, the legislation is still going through the House of Lords, so we've got some time to go before it actually becomes law. And there could be a few changes along the way. I don't suspect there will be, and I think a lot of the information we're going to talk about will be absolutely what comes in the final bill. But just a bit of caveat that things may change. And the second one is, do I know when it's going to happen? No, I don't. I think it's very likely that it will be sometime later this year. I don't think we're going to get to the end of the year without the legislation being in either entirety or part. But as to when that will exactly happen, I think we're in the hands of the government. So let's get started on what it's going to mean to you as private rental landlords. So one of the first things that you'll be required to do is to register with the new Private Rental Sector Ombudsman. Now, as many of you will probably know, within the world of estate and letting agency, we have two ombudsmen. One, the Property Ombudsman, and the other, the Property Redress Scheme. The government intends to introduce a new Private Rented Sector Ombudsman who will be there to deal with any complaints from tenants regarding landlords' behaviours or actions. So every landlord, whether you rent your properties privately or through a letting agent, will be required to be a member of this new Ombudsman scheme. Tenants will be able to refer cases to the Ombudsman if they believe you have treated them unfairly or you have not acted promptly with any issues that have been raised. The Ombudsman will then be able to review that case and issue warnings or issue actions or issue penalties if they believe that you have acted incorrectly. It is expected that there will be a fee to join this Ombudsman, but as yet we don't know any more information as to what that will be. However, if you fail to join the Ombudsman scheme, you could be subject to a penalty of £7,000 for the first instance and multiple penalties for repeat offences. And when all this becomes into law and in force, you will not be able to market a property unless you are registered with the appropriate Ombudsman scheme. Now, running alongside that, there will be a new government private rental sector database. And this is where that you will have to register your details and register details about every property that you let before any marketing commences. And you'll need to put on there things like gas safety certificates, I expect, electrical reports, EPCs, and all the documentation that a tenant would need to see. And the idea of this is that tenants can view that website, that database, and find out information themselves before deciding whether to enter into a tenancy agreement with you and that property. You will not be able to commence marketing unless the properties are registered on the database. And again, you will be subject to penalties if you fail to do that. So these two are new important governance factors that you need to take into account: registering with the Ombudsman and registering your details on this new database. Something new that's going to be introduced is called a ban on rental bidding. Now, you may think, what on earth is rental bidding? Well, imagine a situation where you've got a property that you want to let and you advertise that at £650 a month. And it's a very popular property in a very, very good area. And all of a sudden you've got two tenants who want to rent that property. And one of the tenants comes to you and say, tell you what, you rent that one to me and I'll give you £750 a month. So £100 more than what you've advertised it for. Well, when the new legislation comes in, that will be classed as rental bidding and will be prohibited. So whatever price you advertise your property at to rent, you will not be able to enter into a tenancy agreement at a price higher than that. So all properties will need to go on the market at what they call market rent. Now, market rent is what you can achieve for that property based on other comparable evidence available at that time. So your rental figure has to be market value, and you will not be allowed by law to accept any increased offer over and above that market price. So that's the first thing. The second thing is avoiding any discrimination. Now, we all know that you absolutely can't discriminate against tenants who want to rent one of your properties. And the legislation will still continue to say it's up to landlords and their agent to decide on who to grant a tenancy to. But you cannot decline a tenancy for any grounds of discrimination at all. And this will include any tenant that may have children or any tenant that may be in receipt of benefits. The property and the decision has to be based on affordability and suitability. So obviously, if you have somebody who's a single person with two children and you are renting a one-bedroom apartment, well, that accommodation will probably not be suitable for that tenant. So you could decline on that basis. You would not be able to decline on the basis that they have children. So discrimination grounds will include anyone in receipt of benefits and any tenant with children. Now let's talk about pets. It's probably one of the most common questions I get about tenants wanting to keep pets, and can a landlord say no? Well, when this new legislation comes in, you will not be able to refuse a request for a pet without good reason. And this means that if you have a property that say is a one-bedroom apartment and you've got somebody with a Great Dane and those people are going to be out at work most of the day, then you could probably argue that the accommodation would not be suitable for the welfare of the animal. Whereas me, I've got a Lhasa Apso and they're small and all they need is a sofa and a rug, and they're quite happy to lay on that all day long and need very little exercise. So each case needs to be reviewed individually, but you can't automatically refuse a request from a tenant to keep a pet. Now, I know a lot of you may have concern about the damage that some pets can cause. So therefore, what the legislation will do is also amend the Tenant Fee Act, which will allow you then to request that the tenant take out pet insurance or an additional pet deposit to cover for any damages at the end of the tenancy agreement. I'm sure you'll all agree it's important that any home that's let to a tenant is of a required standard, and you're already making sure that properties meet Homes Fit for Human Habitation, electrical safety, gas safety, smoke and carbon monoxide alarm and Legionella. So there's already many things that you are doing to make sure that your properties are decent homes for tenants. However, the Renters' Rights Bill is going to introduce 2 more requirements for landlords. First of all, decent homes standards. Now, this is already in place within the social housing sector, and the government wished to introduce this into the private rental system. Now, this will make sure that homes are of a decent standard for tenants. Now, what we don't have as yet is the devil in the detail as to exactly what that means. And I think that will come out the more we get to know about the legislation. But properties will need to meet a defined decent homes standards. And with this, there's also something called Awaab's Law. Now, I'm sure you will all recall that awful incident where the 2-year-old died due to mould and damp within a property that hadn't been treated. So Awaab's Law is being introduced into the private rental sector, requiring landlords to take prompt action where any mould is reported within a property. Now, the details on that will come at a later date, and of course everyone will be informed of what that means. But these 2 are really important parts, and when they come in, it's going to be important that you understand what you need to do to meet those requirements and what you need to do if you've got to do any works with your properties to bring those requirements up to the level required. One aspect of the new legislation which is quite interesting is that it will become illegal to ask a tenant to pay rent in advance, and rent will not become due until the AST has been signed. So imagine you're creating a new tenancy and you've got the tenant who wants to move in on the 1st of April. Well, maybe your process would have been that you ask for 1 month's rent prior to you signing that tenancy agreement. And that will no longer be required. What will have to happen is that on the 1st of April, the tenancy is signed. And once the tenancy is signed, then the tenant can pay the rent. So you will not be able to ask for rent in advance. However, the tenant can offer to pay rent in advance if that meets their own circumstances. There may be some tenants that want to pay that money in advance. So if it is the tenant asking if they can pay the rent in advance, that is acceptable. If the landlord or the agent requests or implies that rent will be required in advance, then that will be illegal. The final part I want to talk about is probably the one that means the most to you, because it's all around tenancy reforms and changes to what you currently understand. So firstly, the Renters' Rights Bill will abolish Section 21 notices. These are the no-fault evictions which everybody refers to. So from the implementation of the new legislation, you will not be able to issue a Section 21 notice to evict a tenant. My understanding is any that are already in the system will be okay, but any not raised, then obviously they will not be able to. And also, all fixed term tenancies will move to a periodic tenancy. There will no longer be fixed term tenancies. So if today you have arranged a fixed term tenancy with a tenant for 12 months, and if the Renters' Rights Bill comes in September, from September that tenancy will automatically move to a periodic tenancy. This is to give tenants the flexibility to be able to leave a property when they wish, but also the security that they can stay there until they wish to move out. And the tenant will just be able to then give you 2 months' notice to end the tenancy agreement. Now that's really important you understand that, because obviously a lot of the tenancies that you're now entering into will move to that periodic basis. So abolishment of Section 21s and an end to fixed term tenancies are 2 important things that you need to be really aware of. Now, what about rent increases? You can still increase the rent of your property once every 12 months using the Section 13 notice agreement. So you will not be able to rely on any clause within your AST. It will all be down to annual increase, Section 13 notice, given the required notice period to increase the rent. And the rent that you are going to increase to, again, has to be market value that I mentioned earlier. So it's really important to make sure that your property is now priced at the correct rent. So get it where it needs to be. And then on an annual basis, you can increase the rent on that tenancy. Now, I guess a lot of you are really concerned about getting your properties back if you need to. So if we're abolishing Section 21 no-fault eviction notices, how are you going to get your properties back? Well, please rest assured that there are ample grounds under a Section 8 notice procedure for you to get your properties back. And that's grounds for, rent arrears. It's grounds because you want the property back to live in yourself. It's grounds because you want the property back from a member of your family. You want to sell the property, antisocial behaviour, breach of tenancies. There's a whole host of grounds in which you can commence with possession orders. But it's going to be really important to make sure that your documentation is correct. Because one of the things that happens so often is somebody will go to court with a Section 8 notice for possession, and you will go on to court and the tenant will suddenly say, hang on, this piece of paper hasn't been completed correctly, and it gets thrown out. I had a case that I was involved with, which was a landlord had a gas safety check done on a property because the previous one had expired. Gas safe engineer went into the property to do the check, issued the certificate, no problem. Everything was all happy. Fast forward to the date they go to court because the landlord wanted to evict the tenant because of rent arrears. And the tenant at the last minute presented to the court a copy of the gas safety certificate. And they said to the judge that they believed the gas safety certificate was invalid. And it was. And it was invalid because the gas engineer had gone out, say, for argument's sake, on the Monday. And he went out to do this inspection, got home that night, logging on, and he couldn't log on to his system. So he logged on the next morning, filed all the details, and sent it off. But the legislation states that your gas safety certificate has to be dated the date the inspection was carried out. And because this one was dated the following day, the court ruled that the gas safety certificate was invalid, and therefore the Section 8 notice was also invalid. And they had to start the whole process off all again. So it's really, really important that the documentation supporting a tenancy is absolutely correct, because it's going to need to be relied upon if you ever get to that court position. Now, there are some changes, of course, you can expect. So for example, if you want to gain possession because you want to move back into the property yourself or to sell the property, then the tenant has got an initial 12-month period from the start of the tenancy before that notice can be served. So if I'm moving into a property today, I've got 12 months there before you can serve me notice that you wish to regain possession of that property. And the time periods for rent arrears are also increasing slightly. So you just need to make sure that you're considering how you're protecting yourself if your tenant suddenly can't pay their rent. And that's important to consider that, because nobody knows what's going to happen to somebody's financial position once they get into a tenancy. So making sure you're protected to get your income for that is really important. And that's where our guild members can help you and offer you some advice and support with that one. So don't worry, there are always grounds in which you can gain possession of your property. Things are a little bit different, but there are sufficient grounds that means you can get your property back if you need to get your property back, and certainly if the tenant is in breach of any tenancy condition. So don't panic. So in conclusion, before I hand back to our Guild member, I just want to say a few words. First of all, remember, this is part of the government's manifesto when at the last election, in building homes for tenants and making tenants part of the local community. It also gives you some security in making sure that that tenant may be turned into a long-term tenant for you, and the tenancy will run without any issues whatsoever. There will be some changes, but sometimes change is welcomed once you understand what it means. And I don't believe it's going to be an end to the private rental sector. We've had such legislation introduced into Scotland and into Wales, and there hasn't been a massive impact on the demand for private rental properties. Investing in property is still a really good investment, and providing you get the right tenant and you've got the right paperwork in place, then there's no reason why that tenancy can't continue without any issue whatsoever. So what I would say to you is make sure you take good advice, make sure you consider the options available to you, and our Guild member will be able to help you with both of those issues. So don't panic, and above all, carry on renting.
Thank you for that, Paul. I hope you found that useful and insightful, and has helped you gain a bit more information on what the changes that are coming, and your responsibilities as a landlord. We have in recent times seen more inquiries for our managed service as opposed to our let-only service, and in fact a lot of our let-only landlords have inquired about changing over to our managed service, just because they'd like a bit more greater depth and expertise when it comes to managing their tenancies and properties. It's really important to get this right when it comes to tenancies, as you can, as you will with the changing legislation, come into problems if it's not done properly. So if you would like more information on any of the subject of the Renters Reform Bill, or you'd like more information on our managed service, please give us a call on 01677 422 82.